You know that feeling when a book stops feeling like something you're reading and starts to feel like somewhere you've gone? When the setting becomes vivid and the atmosphere settles around you, and the world of the book feels more immediate than your own. Those are the kinds of books I want to talk about today. Because getting lost in a book is not just about pace or page turning. It's not just about how quickly you get through the book, or being pulled through a story by adventure or suspense. Sometimes it's much quieter than that. It's about attention, about the moment where your focus shifts completely, where you're no longer aware of the act of reading, but you are now inside that story. And the books that do this the best aren't always the same. Some are slow and atmospheric, some are narrative, and some are warm and others are unsettling. But they all create that same feeling, that sense that you've stepped into a different world and for a while you're living there. And often it's not one single element that gives you this feeling. It's not just plot or writing or characters. It's the combination of place, atmosphere, time, and the way a book holds your attention long enough for all of that to take shape. So these are a few books that for me create that kind of experience. Books where the weather, the setting, the passage of time all felt immersive enough that I could disappear into them completely. The Good People by Hannah Kent is a book that you do not rush. And that is because the world feels incredibly present. It's a historical fiction book set in 17th century rural Ireland and follows a widow who is caring for her grandson who may or may not be a changeling who has been put there by the fairy folk. In this book, the landscape feels quite inseparable from the story itself. As I read it, I could almost smell the earthiness, I could see the thatched roofs, I could hear the sizzle of the turf on the fire. There's a real physicality to this world that is hard to ignore. And even wider than that is the weather, the isolation, the sense of belief and superstition that shapes how people understand the world and try and make sense of things that they don't quite understand. It unfolds very slowly, even though the story itself I would consider quite fast-paced, because there is this underlying tension throughout. And the longer you sit with it, the more it draws you in. Not through plot especially, but through atmosphere and unease. After a while, that atmosphere felt like not something I was just observing, but something I was experiencing. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley, Jackson. This is a very different kind of immersion, which is through perspective. It's a gothic and psychological story, which is in a very different, much smaller, contained world, as it follows two sisters who are living in isolation following a family tragedy. And everything is filtered through Merricat, whose childlike perspective is quite peculiar and very unsettling. So the world that you're stepping into isn't just a place, but it is a way of seeing. It's a book that feels almost claustrophobic, but that's what makes it so absorbing. You're not moving through a wide landscape, but you're moving through a very specific mind. And honestly, it is not one that you are sure you can trust entirely. However, the longer you stay there, the harder it is to step outside of it. I felt simultaneously creeped out and also comforted by the day-to-day normal activities that Merricat and her sister went through in their isolation. It's immersive in a way that feels slightly disorienting, but it is also very hard to pull away from. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This is probably the starkest example of immersion because it strips everything away. It's a quiet and dystopian book that starts with a group of women who are imprisoned underground with no clear reason why they're there or how they got there. All we know is that the narrator is no longer there because she is writing her story as we are reading it. There is very little excess in the writing. There is no elaborate descriptions, not a lot to hold on to in the traditional sense, and there's not a lot of movement. And yet it's incredibly absorbing because of how controlled and contained it is. It demands your attention in a different way. It's the kind of book where not a lot seems to happen, but you just can't look away from it. And that sense of containment, of being on the inside of something with no defined edges, becomes its own kind of immersion. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is a completely different type of immersion. It's set just after the Second World War and is told through a series of letters. And because it's told this way, the world builds very gradually. It's told through details and memories and relationships. And in this book, that accumulation creates a world that is very vivid, very real, and it feels lived in. It's a really good reminder that disappearing into a story doesn't have to be heavy. It can be gentle, it can be warm, and still genuinely absorbing. The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. In some ways, this is the most simplest example of this kind of reading, but for me, it is one of the most powerful. To be honest, any one of the Little House books would be a great example of a book that you disappear into, but this is the 5th book in the Little House series, and for me, I think it is the prime example, as it follows a particularly brutal winter when the town and families are cut off for months. Very little changes day to day in this story, but I feel like it is built around the endurance, the waiting, the not knowing. You start to feel the cold, the hunger, the stillness, and the very, very long stretch of time. And for me, it's because of all those small repeated details that the book is somewhere that I live in when I read it. It becomes really vivid, and it's not because anything dramatic is happening, but because you are fully in that experience. So I think the books that we disappear into, or that I disappear into, are not always the fastest or the most plot-driven of books. But they're the ones that ask us to slow down and to leave our preconceived ideas at the door, and they require our attention. The ones where the setting matters and the atmosphere lingers, and where the experience of reading starts to feel as important as the book itself. And when you find a book like that, it doesn't feel like you are escaping your life. And these are the books that I find I return to. Especially when it comes to comfort reads, they are usually those books that I can disappear in completely and feel like I've been somewhere when I read it. And if you've ever had that experience of a book staying with you like that, I've left another video at the end which kind of explores that a bit further. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful week of reading ahead, and I'll speak with you soon. Bye.